Cathedral of the Episcopal Diocese of Nevada. We're grateful that you join us today for our Tell Us What's Happening questions and answers with Father William. Today I want to mention to you that we are completing the Easter season, the week of weeks, and on this Sunday we celebrate Pentecost. With Pentecost, it's been a very big Sunday for us in the past. We will continue to try to honor as much of those traditions as we have had in the past. We will commemorate especially milestones and passages that have occurred, such as graduations and retirements. If there are any of those events that have occurred in your life, please let the office know so that we can include your name this weekend with the pronouncement of blessings upon those who have accomplished these various milestones. Also, since we are, excuse me, since we are at the end of the month, we will also be observing anniversary and birthday blessings as a part of our service. It will be the final Sunday for Reverend Michaela, and as a part of the closing of our liturgy, we will be doing a farewell Godspeed blessing for her as we say goodbye and as we pray for her future direction and her ministry with her husband in Montana. The following Sunday, the first Sunday of, let me back up again. On Pentecost Sunday, we will be leaving the church space. We are now ready to move over to the parish hall. So at the close of the service, we will also do a very brief ceremony to put closure to our worship space here as we prepare for construction work to take place. The following Sunday, we will do a blessing ceremony as we will be in the parish hall and recording our liturgies from there. So we have this transition that is occurring and want to be mindful of the loss that that means for a period of time as construction will take place, and we look forward to being back in our main worship facility. I want to thank especially the volunteers, our junior warden, Lynn Charlotte, and Harold Campbell, our maintenance man, who this week have been putting some final touches on all the work that's been taking place in moving out of this particular building. We have managed to finally have a dumpster delivered last week, Friday, and this Tuesday morning. We had moving vans here to finalize getting all the furnishings and supplies that are needed to be in storage onto those trucks and moved. We now have the dumpsters for purging that which we no longer need to be hanging on to. And then other items have been transitioned over to the parish hall. So a lot of activity has been occurring over these last several weeks, but a lot of final details are finally now occurring. In fact, if you were to be here in the space, you would see that all the pews, the communion rail have been removed because we are preparing this week on Monday for the installation of scaffolding to begin the process of removing the pipes and portions of the organ that will then be put into storage. So activities toward the renovation are beginning, and it is quite exciting, and it is certainly stirring up lots of dust around here, and we are grateful to all who have been able to offer their services, their muscle, to help us make those transitions. I also want to mention that this week we also have finished our process with our search for a new church musician. A decision is to be made, and we are hoping soon to be announcing to you the new person that will become our full-time church musician. And we're very happy with the process, and we are very much looking forward to having this new person on board. I want to share a little bit with you, especially in light of a letter that came out from Bishop Wagner this week, which is a very important thing for all of us to hear. As many of you know, over a week ago, President Trump announced that churches should be considered essential entities and that they should be opened. Well, unfortunately, it is not an easy thing to do. And so we are going to be guiding you in what that means for us, especially as the Episcopal Church, as a diocese, and what it will mean for our individual congregations. So first I want to read this letter that comes out of the fact that Bishop Jim has been meeting with the Province 8 provincial bishops of the western part of our country, including Alaska and Hawaii. And with that, the bishops had a very lengthy meeting on Tuesday and have made some decisions and guidelines. The next day, Bishop Jim met with a few of us from the diocese. He selected some clergy throughout the diocese to meet with him and also with Canon Catherine for us to begin to talk about what all of this means for us as a diocese and for us as individual parishes in this diocese. So I read this letter from Bishop Jim that at this point has been sent out to all of our vestry people. Dear friends in Christ, as I have been in communication with the bishops in Province 8, with our chancellor, clerics, and diocesan staff members, I have made the decision to keep our church campuses closed. Coronavirus numbers continue to climb in Nevada, and protocols from the CDC and other health agencies prescribe safety procedures for reopening churches that we are not yet able to meet. Liability issues are also considered in this decision, along with the health and welfare of our parishioners. The decision about how and when to reopen our parish buildings will be revisited in early July. Throughout June, no gatherings may be held on church property in the Diocese of Nevada. Next week, I'll be sending out a more detailed letter about our plans for moving forward together and how we might continue to be the church, even when we are not able to meet in our own buildings. Please be assured that detailed information about reopening your campuses will be given to you when the time is appropriate, and you do not need to create your own plans. In the meantime, may you and your parish continue to grow in depth of love, patience, and compassion through this time of sacrifice. Bishop Jim. I also want to share with you, as a result of that meeting that we had as a few clergy of the diocese with Bishop Jim yesterday, is that our major concern is the welfare and the safety of our people. And as we know, the majority of our parishes are elderly. The majority of our parish consists of people who are quite vulnerable. And so the major concern is that we have to consider the health and well-being of not only our own members, but the members of our community. And the only way we can be safe right now is to continue to do what we are doing, following the guidelines of the medical and scientific community, information that comes from our state, and guidelines that are being determined by the bishops of our church. The safest thing for us to do is to continue to do online worship. That's the only thing we are secure about doing, knowing it's safe, and knowing that it is giving us a connection. It isn't the ideal solution, but it's what we've had to live with over these last couple months. It is our present reality, and it is the safest way for us to be able to continue to be the church. Yes, we know the church is open, but the church buildings are what are closed. So we do continue to be the church, and we are continuing as much as we can with all the safety procedures and guidelines that are essential, doing our ministries according to those guidelines. A lot of issues, a lot of energy, a lot of human power is needed when and if we are able to open. And there's so many details to what that all means that it's so overwhelming that the clergy themselves are saying, I don't know how we can do this. It is an extremely overwhelming task to create safe spaces and for us to be the church as we had been prior to our shutdown with the pandemic. I received an article this morning from one of our clergy who found this document by another priest who writes about what it would look like if you were to be coming to church now. And so I want to share this with you because I think it's an awakening to see the reality of what we are dealing with and what can happen to us. We realize it's been a month of isolation, several months, and that these months have forced us to be at home. This article is called, "So Your Church is Opening Up After COVID-19 Closures? It Won't Be What You Are Hoping For." And so he imagines for us of what that could be. It's been months of isolation, months of mostly staying at home to stop the spread of the COVID-19. But active cases are going down, or maybe not. They're not here in the state of Nevada. 2 weeks ago, we were one of 8 states showing growth. Last week, 8. And as of last evening's news, we now are of 11 states that are still showing growth. That in itself says a lot about how we should be responding. Politicians and business leaders are worried about the economic impact of social distancing. And so for a few weeks now, things have been opening up, even here in the state of Nevada. Playgrounds and hair salons, dentists, restaurant patios are letting people come back. And things seem to be going well enough, so the government announces the next phase of opening, which includes increased sizes of gatherings. And one of the places you have been missing the most, your church, sends out an email telling you that they are going to reopen for an in-person service on Sunday. As the president announced, and as many churches are fighting, there is a demand that we come back to our churches. You heard from a friend that your pastor was against it, but enough folks are pressuring the church councils to become, because of freedom of religion. People are getting tired of staying home, and surely church would be a safe place, wouldn't it? Plus, you're missing your friends. You're missing the folks you love to see on Sunday mornings and other couples that you may go to with brunch after the morning worship. Finally, the big day comes, and you wake up excited to get back to this important part of your life, to do something that feels a bit more normal, to be able to come back to church, seeing familiar faces, hearing familiar voices, being in familiar community. So you hop in the car with your spouse and you make that well-worn drive to church that's so familiar. You notice that the streets are deader than they have been on Sunday mornings. When you arrive at church, there's a few cars parked around the building. You go to your normal parking spot just down one of the side streets, half a block from the church. And you start walking to the church building, but before you get too close, a masked volunteer approaches you. They're standing there on the sidewalk with a clipboard. "Please stay here." They stop about 6 feet away from where you are standing. Okay, you think you know who this is, but because they're wearing a mask on their face, you're not quite sure who they are. They begin to ask you, have you had any of the following symptoms recently? Cough, fever, body aches, difficulty breathing. "No, not that I know of," you say. "Are you over the age of 65 or do you have any underlying health conditions?" "No, not that I'm aware of," you say. Technically, you and your spouse are 67 and you take blood pressure meds, but no big deal, you say to yourself. "Have you been traveling recently or spent any time with someone who's traveled recently?" They then ask you. "No," you answer again. But you don't mention the socially distant backyard barbecue you had with your neighbors the other night, including one neighbor who is a long-haul truck driver. Have you been in contact with anyone who's been exposed to COVID-19, they then ask, such as a healthcare worker? I don't think so, you murmur in response. The babysitting you do for your son and daughter-in-law, who is a home care nurse, doesn't count. I mean, after all, family is okay, isn't it? Please maintain a social distance while I have you wait here in line for a moment. So the volunteer gestures ahead where they see a few dozen folks that are lined up, all spaced out according to the markers along the sidewalk. Usually when you arrive at church, you come early to visit with folks before the service. But as you stand in line, people just whisper among households. Even though you can see many familiar ahead, you cannot help but feel suspicious and fear that you look at the others. You try to shake the feeling, but this pandemic world has affected you more than you care to admit. Another couple line up behind you, and then you hear the masked volunteer turn to another family and turn them away. Sorry, we're at the max group size we're allowed. Maybe try again next week. And so they depart. The church stays closed right up until the time of the service. Then finally, with 5 minutes to go, the doors open and households begin entering one at a time. Another masked volunteer is letting the people in. Slowly, you shuffle up to the front door. When it gets to your turn, the volunteer waits for you to come in, and there, 2 surgical masks and some hand sanitizers are laid out for you to use. Please clean your hands and put on these masks. You comply. Now, please follow the taped line to pew number 23 and take your seat. Please don't stop to talk to anyone, and please remain in your seat for the duration of the service. You follow the taped line into the sanctuary. Everyone is sitting down in spaced out pews by households. The church is eerily quiet, kind of like a funeral home, with a masked organist sitting at the instrument. Finally, when everyone is inside, the doors of the church are closed. Instead of processing in from the back, the pastor is usually visiting with people before church. He slips in the front of the church through a side door. He greets everyone behind a mask, which makes him very hard to understand. The pastor then explains that there will be no singing in worship and no praying together or communal responses to the liturgy. You then notice there are no hymn books, no offering plates, no offering envelopes, no welcoming cards, no pencils, nothing in the pew. Everything is empty. Even the seat cushions are removed. You also didn't get a bulletin, though a single sheet of paper may be given to you to follow. That has to be disposed of at the close of the service. Listening to the pastor, they don't sound like their normal self. They sound tense or forced or a bit stressed. You can't quite put your finger on what you're feeling. The pastor then goes and stands in front of a phone on a tripod at the front of the church and starts talking into it, welcoming all the people worshiping online. The pastor explains where the bulletin can be found on Facebook, how to share the peace and greet others that are watching online. Then the pastor picks up the tripod, turns it around, and asks you to wave at the phone so that everyone can be seen. You feel pretty silly and weird about that particular act. The organist plays the hymns, but no one is able and encouraged to be singing. So you just sit and listen. It felt awkward to sing along with hymns at home, but this even feels stranger. The pastor then begins worship, and every time you want to say, and also with you, or an amen, you have to stop yourself. Instead, there's just silence, while the pastor imagines how long it would take for the folks watching online to give their responses. The first masked volunteer goes to the mic and the music stand on the other side of the chancel to read the lessons. You can't say, join in the psalm responsively, so again, you just sit quietly and you listen. Finally, it comes to the sermon. The pastor preaches about Pentecost and the coming of the Holy Spirit, encouraging you, but mostly the folks that are home, that are watching, to keep the faith. The pastor says the time will come when the Spirit will send us out into the world, but that time isn't quite yet. And that even though we are apart, that Spirit ties us together as one. It doesn't feel like the pastor's preaching to you, but mostly to those who are watching from home. After listening to the hymn of the day, the creeds, the prayers, it comes time for the peace. The pastor offers the peace, but tells you that today it has to be done only virtually. The pastor uses an iPad to share with the folks online and talks a bit to the phone again, saying hello to the people watching at home and commenting. Then it comes time for Holy Communion, something you've missed for months. The pastor puts on a face shield and changes their mask before the Thanksgiving at the altar table. You notice that they don't lift the bread or the wine. After the Lord's Prayer, which you say along with the pastor in your head, one of the masked volunteers steps to the mic to instruct you how to receive communion. Household by household, you go forward. There's only bread to receive. You have to hand sanitize before you get to the front. The pastor is using a set of tongs to put the wafer into your hand. The bread of Christ given for you, you hear as it is handed into your hand as you stand there behind a mask with a shield. This is not like communion that you have ever received before. You aren't allowed to eat until the pastor has moved away. And then after you put the wafer into your mouth, you have to hand sanitize again before you return to your seat. All knowing that pulling off your mask has compromised it because your daughter-in-law gave you the lecture on how to wear that mask properly. The service concludes with another hymn that you listen to, a blessing, and then some announcements. And then just like you came, you have to follow the tape straight line to the back of the building, one household at a time to leave. The pastor isn't greeting anyone on the way out. In fact, there's no one, just the voice of the masked volunteer on the PA system announcing pew numbers as to how you depart from the building. There are signs that tell you to leave the church straight away, no lingering. So you walk back to your car with your spouse. You get in and drive home. You have no idea what you had just experienced. You were at church. There were other people there. There were hymns. There were prayers. The pastor preached. You received communion, kind of. But that wasn't church. And it certainly wasn't what you imagined, what you thought of things opening up again would appear like. And so you drive home in silence, realizing that just maybe the world has changed more than you had figured out. It might take some time to get used to this new normal. 3 days later, you get a text from your neighbor, one of the ones who you had socially distanced with the barbecue the previous night. You're going to get a call from the public health nurse. This person informs you over the phone, "I am so sorry." A few minutes later, the phone rings. "Hi, I'm calling from the local public health agency, and I'm calling you today as a part of the COVID-19 contact healing team." Your heart drops, and the nurse's voice starts to sound like the teacher from Charlie Brown. You make out something about a testing appointment, and the nurse gives you a time and a date and an address. Then the nurse says, "I'm going to need you to tell me all the people you may have come into contact with in the past 2 weeks, especially any group in indoor spaces for prolonged periods of time, like doctor offices or someone else's home, or maybe even your church." I think this is the reality of what we face. It is indeed disturbing. I believe that our decision as the vast majority of our clergy, if not all, 100% of our clergy in this diocese, is that we need to remain safe. We will continue to be the church. We will continue to do ministry. We will continue to bring worship as best as we can to your homes and continue to be putting out information, newsletter, blasts, whatever we can do to be connected to you folks. This is what is important. Many of you may not realize, but the CDC puts us as a church, as churches, as church communities in the same category as nursing homes and prisons. And the reason for that is that the activity that we are about as a church, all that we do as a church, involves so much interaction that it puts others at risk. And so therefore, we really need to be patient. We need to listen to the scientific evidence, to the information that the scientific and the medical community are putting out for us. We need to be careful of one another, protecting others. And so, difficult news for us to hear, but know that we continue to be a community, and we are in this together. I thank you for your ears today. Please send questions to me if you have concerns to be made. And I thank you and pray that you will continue to be safe and bless you this day and always. Amen.